The 1930s also saw the advent of the phenomenon called the Dust Bowl, which was an environmental phenomenon that affected the region that you can see there in the map, that splotch that is essentially the western half of Kansas, a little bit of southern Nebraska, eastern Colorado, a little bit of New Mexico and North Texas, and the westernmost part of Oklahoma. That whole area suffered a huge drought, and it was more than the drought. What had happened, you see, is that farmers for several generations since Americans, not Native Americans, but U.S. Americans had settled that area after driving the Native Americans out. They had been farming that region, and they had been using the farming techniques that they had always used east of the Mississippi, which were the farming techniques handed down from Western and Northern Europe. And those farming techniques were fine for those areas, but in the American Southwest, which is very arid, those techniques are not that beneficial. And in fact, some people, scientists, had been warning farmers in the area for several years before the Great Depression that they needed to start doing things differently. And one of the things they needed to stop doing was plowing these long, long furrows, which is how people had always plowed, right? These long, straight furrows over and over again without resting the land. And that the fact is that made the soil, if there were a big drought, a lot more susceptible to erosion. And that's exactly what happened. This had been expedited by the fact that in the late 19-teens and into the 1920s, a lot of small farmers had been bought out by large commercial agriculture companies. And so they were doing large-scale operations, but using the same methods, right? So a lot of plowing, a lot more plowing than previously in the 1920s. And those furrows, over and over again, loosened the soil, damaged the topsoil and the grasses, and in particular those grasses, they kind of worked the way they did for a reason. They kind of held the soil together, you see, so that when the drought came, all this soil dried up, and the way it had been farmed for so long meant that when the winds came, and this is out there on the prairie where the winds will come because there's not much to stop them. The soil was just blown away. Literally dust in the wind. Huge, huge amounts of soil. A lot of farmers lost their farms, other than the fact that if they looked up in the sky, they could see them because it was swirling around, you know. This actually led to not just the soil, the topsoil, leaving, which ruined the prospects of farming there, but there were huge dust clouds, dust storms that just blackened the sky and in some cases killed people. And in some cases, some of these big dust storms were blowing dust into other parts of the country, over on the other side of the Mississippi River even. So you had to, if you lived in this area, you had to make sure that you stuffed things underneath the cracks in your door, or this dust would be constantly blowing into your house. And this led to large numbers of people, like I said, losing their farms, which meant that there were other people who maybe didn't own farms but worked on farms. They lost their jobs and became homeless. So what wound up happening is that as the numbers of homeless people grew, they started migrating out of that area. toward California because there were rumors that there was plenty of work there in the cotton and in the fruit orchards in particular. So folks picked up and moved in large numbers, but the fact is, while there were jobs in California and they had important things like soil, for example, there weren't as many jobs as there were people coming to take them. So people living in California developed negative attitudes toward those other people from the Dust Bowl regions, whom Californians referred to contemptuously as Okies, that is, people from Oklahoma, even though most of them weren't from Oklahoma. But they called them Okies, and they were very unwelcome in California. In fact, at one point, the California State Police were stationed along the California border, preventing any more people from coming in. It is not a coincidence, by the way. It is not a coincidence that the Dust Bowl happened the way it did at the same time as the Great Depression, because in some ways, both of them had the same cause, and that cause was the total lack of regulation in the 1920s. After that swing at the end of the progressive era toward more conservative approaches and less regulation, then a lot of the laws that had been restricting the behavior of businesses were removed, and on Wall Street that led to all the speculation, the very dangerous levels of it, and it also led to in the Dust Bowl region to the expansion of those commercial agricultural interests and the fact that the government had no control over what methods they were using, even though government scientists knew that it was dangerous. Yes, that's the mellifluous tones of Merle Haggard, Okie from Muskogee, which it's not an accident that I inserted this right in the middle of a discussion of the Dust Bowl, even though Merle Haggard was a country singer who became famous in the 1960s. There's a connection. Merle Haggard was not from Muskogee. Actually, he was from Bakersfield, California. And so was Buck Owens. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the old show Hee Haw. He was the co-host of that. But before that, he was a very famous country singer, also in the 1960s. There was this kind of a subgenre of country music called the Bakersfield Sound that had a little bit of a rock and roll influence on it. And it's from California. Well, may seem kind of odd that there would be a big strain of country music from California, and that's because of the Dust Bowl. Merle Haggard may not have actually been an Okie from Muskogee, but his parents were. They were, and so were Buck Owens' parents, not necessarily from Muskogee, but from Oklahoma. So these two guys, these two country legends, were the kids of Okies who had to leave Oklahoma, which was a rural part of the Southwest. And in some ways, Oklahoma culture is a lot like Southern culture. I mean, Garth Brooks and Reba McEntire are from there. And were transplanted to California. So that's how Okies from Muskogee created the Bakersfield Sound. In 1939, novelist John Steinbeck wrote a very influential novel. In fact, it is a classic of American literature about Okies called The Grapes of Wrath. that follows the Joad family from Oklahoma, who were forced to pack up and leave after they've been evicted from their farm, and they make the exodus along with several of their friends to California, where the promise is there's work and everything's going to be great. And then when they get there, they discover that they are not welcomed at all and that they are actually terribly mistreated. This was made into a film just about a year after the book came out by the director John Ford, starring the great Henry Fonda. And we're going to listen to an audio clip in a moment from that film. It's from the speech that the hero Tom Joad gives at the end of the movie when he's forced to go on the run from the cops. He's gotten involved in a labor strike that ended up with one of his friends being killed, and in trying to defend his friend, he had killed somebody. And so basically all these things they'd been promised did not materialize. And this speech is one of the most famous speeches in cinema history. So let's give it a listen. It's pretty short, this little excerpt, and then I'll talk about it a little bit.
How am I going to know about you, Tommy? Why, they could kill you and I'd never know. They could hurt you. How am I going to know?
Well, maybe it's like Casey says. The fella ain't got a soul of his own, just a little piece of a big soul. The one big soul that belongs to everybody. Then
What, Tom?
Then it don't matter. I'll be all around in the dark. I'll be everywhere. Wherever you can look. Wherever there's a fight so hungry people can eat, I'll be there. Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there. I'll be in the way guys yell when they're mad. I'll be in the way kids laugh when they're hungry and they know supper's ready. And when the people are eating the stuff they raise, living in the houses they build, I'll be there too.
That particular speech and that outlook are really sort of ultimate expressions of FDR New Deal thinking. The sort of thinking that centers around the greater good and of community and of everyone working together rather than focusing on the individual and the individual's effort to get ahead. This sort of idea really had taken on in a big way by this time. In fact, we've talked a lot about Will Rogers. Let's listen to just a brief excerpt of a speech from him that conveys this idea. Bear in mind, Will Rogers, whom, as I told you before, is or was Cherokee, was from Oklahoma.
These people that you're asked to aid, why, they're not asking for charity. They're naturally asking for a job. But if you can't give them a job, why, the next best thing you can do is see that they have food and the necessities of life. You know, there's not a one of us that has anything that these people that are without it now haven't contributed to what we've got. I don't suppose there's the most unemployed, the hungriest man in America has contributed in some way to the wealth of every millionaire in America. It wasn't the working class that brought this condition on at all. It was the big boys themselves who thought that this financial drunk we were going through was going to last forever. They over-merged and over-capitalized and over everything else. That's the fix that we're in now. Now, I think that every town and every city will raise this money. In fact, they can't afford not to. They've got the money because there's as much money in the country as there ever was. Only the fewer people have it, but it's there. And I think the towns will all raise it, because I've been on a good many charity affairs all over the country, and I have yet to see a town or a city ever fail to raise the money when they knew the need was there and they saw the necessity. Every one of them will come through. Europe don't like us, and they think we're arrogant and bad manners, have a million faults, but every one of us every one of them, they give us credit for being liberal. Doggone it, people are liberal. Our Americans, I don't know about America being fundamentally sound and all that after dinner hooey, but I do know that America is fundamentally liberal.
Another famous person from the time period who was from Oklahoma was Woody Guthrie, probably the all-time greatest folk singer. Famously on his guitar, he had a sticker that said, "This machine kills fascists," by which he means, of course, his guitar. Music, art, and most importantly, the truth. That's what kills fascism. Well, maybe you've heard of Woody Guthrie, and maybe you haven't, but I'm willing to bet you've heard at least one of his songs.
This land is your land, and this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me.
If you're like me, you have sung that song, have known that song from a young age. I remember in elementary school, that's one of the songs they taught us to sing. I imagine summer camps, various other places around the country. For many decades now, people have been singing that song. Probably got it stuck in your head now. However, there was an extra verse to that song that didn't get included in any of the radio edits, or certainly is not included when they sing it at summer camp or in elementary school. So I'm going to share that with you. This is from a cover by someone else. This obviously isn't Woody Guthrie, but listen to these lyrics.
As I went walking, I saw a sign there, and on the signage said no trespassing, but on the other side it didn't say nothing. That side was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. In the shadow of the steeple, I saw my people. By the relief office, I've seen my people as they stood there hungry. I stood there asking, is this land made for you and me? No.
You know, that kind of changes the whole song, doesn't it? It goes from being the song that we were taught, the parts of it that we were taught about America is beautiful and how great everything is, to at the very end questioning and saying, but wait a minute, look what's going on. Is this really made for you and me? And look at all the suffering. And yeah, it's not saying America sucks. The main theme of the song still is that this land is made for you and me, but it's not quite guaranteed the way that it tends to be presented. Here, there is some there's some questioning and perhaps a suggestion that there needs to be some adjustment, which also is a very FDR New Deal way of thinking. Another famous person from the time period who was from Oklahoma was Woody Guthrie, probably the all-time greatest folk singer. Famously on his guitar, he had a sticker that said, "This machine kills fascists," by which he means, of course, his guitar. Music, art, and most importantly, the truth. That's what kills fascism. Well, maybe you've heard of Woody Guthrie, and maybe you haven't, but I'm willing to bet you've heard at least one of his songs.
This land is your land, and this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me.
If you're like me, you have sung that song, have known that song from a young age. I remember in elementary school, that's one of the songs they taught us to sing. I imagine summer camps, various other places around the country. For many decades now, people have been singing that song. Probably got it stuck in your head now. However, there was an extra verse to that song that didn't get included in any of the radio edits, or certainly is not included when they sing it at summer camp or in elementary school. So I'm going to share that with you. This is from a cover by someone else. This obviously isn't Woody Guthrie, but listen to these lyrics.